Thanks for joining us. I'm Arianna Sippel, Senior Manager for growAG at AgriFutures. Today we are joined by Sarah Nolet, the partner and co-founder of Tenacious Ventures, Australia's first dedicated agri-food tech VC firm. She's also CEO and co-founder of Agthentic and a board member of the Australian Agritech Association. Tenacious Ventures is part of a growing pool of domestic and international capital actively investing in Australian agri-food innovation. Great to have you with us, Sarah.
Yeah, great to be here, Arianna.
I thought we'd kick off by asking you a little bit about Tenacious. What are you focusing on at the moment, and your investment thesis? What are you getting excited about?
So we're a early stage venture capital fund. We invest at the seed and Series A into agri-food tech startups that are helping agriculture transition to a carbon neutral and climate change resilient future. And so that's a ton of areas across Australian agriculture predominantly, looking at robotics and automation, looking at novel food production systems, sustainable protein, and a whole range of other really exciting areas.
I'm interested to kind of unpack a little bit what led you to those particular sectors. What's the process that you go through when you're trying to identify where you're going to focus particularly?
I guess it kind of goes back to why we started Tenacious. So Matthew, my co-founder, and I had been working in the early stage innovation ecosystem in Australia for a number of years, and we just kept coming back to this theme that Australian research is really good and Australian agriculture is really good, and yet we were struggling to commercialize opportunities. And part of the reason was we didn't have a high conviction, high support fund that had the access to the startup ecosystem and understood the different dynamics of startups, but also really understood agriculture. And so that's really why Tenacious was born, to bring together that capital and to help Australia punch well above its weight in startups and innovation like we do in agriculture and agricultural research. And so that's led to a number of different areas focused on big themes we see around the world. So things like climate resilience, things like lowering the emissions intensity of agriculture or lowering the chemical intensity of agriculture, or things like unlocking new revenue streams for producers or turning waste into new value streams that we can capitalize on as we move towards a net zero future. So a whole range of areas where Australia is really quite strong, and Tenacious Ventures helps bring that capital to back innovators that can turn that research or those technologies into impact.
Those themes are also really important, obviously, to your major LPs, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation here in Australia, and also growAG Ventures. How much are you seeing that theme amongst other groups that you're talking to, potential investors in your fund or other co-investors and LPs and so on?
Yeah, so in addition to those investors, we have a number of other investors who all care about impact in different ways. And that's really great to have the backing of these investors who truly believe in this transition. But it's not concessionary. We really believe that in having an impact is where the returns will be found as well. And so it's truly both doing good and doing well. And that's what our investors across tech and agribusiness and impact are really excited about. And we're so fortunate to have those investors, including growAG and the CEFC, who help us bring that mission to life, not only with the money they've put into the fund, but also with their support for what they see as a really big strength in Australia and wanting to back our agri-food innovation system.
A lot of the groups that you invest into, certainly do have, farmers themselves at the helm of some of those companies, or people who've come back to agriculture and back to agricultural innovation after some time away. What other things do you look for in your investees? What are some of the drivers or key pieces you're looking for when you're checking out investees?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned team there. So we think about the opportunity and the company and the deal. And opportunity are some of those big areas I was mentioning before, but also things like, is the market big enough, and who are the competitors, and what's the global landscape looking like? Because we need to know that we're looking at a big enough market, but also that the company is not just locally best, but also going to be able to succeed globally. And then we look at the company, and so that's the team, the background of the founders, which sometimes they come from on-farm, and sometimes they come from on-farm and leave and come back, or sometimes they bring totally different perspectives into the industry with backgrounds in finance or advanced technologies, and they're coming into agriculture for different reasons. And so we really look at that team. Do they have the capability to execute, as well as a great and defensible idea and a business model that's going to realize that idea? Because what we've seen, and I think this has been one of the challenges in Australia, is there's there can be a lot of focus on the technology itself and on the IP or on the research, and not enough on the business model that's going to get it into the hands of farmers. And that's really what we look for in that team and that entrepreneur, is how are they going to have that impact on the value chain and capture that value as they grow the company. And then the final part is the deal, things like valuation and terms and mechanics like that. So we take that kind of three-lens approach, with the team being probably the most important.
Just picking up on those LPs that you do have, what are some of the areas in sustainability that you are particularly looking to head down next? What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so I guess probably easier to talk about some of the investments we have made. So our first investment was a company called GoTerra, and they're helping divert waste from landfill with their biological-based, tech-enabled waste management solution. And so it's a great example of a massive challenge we have in our world right now in the form of food waste. And when I was mentioning business model innovation before, that's exactly what GoTerra has. Their decentralized system enables clients to manage waste and divert it from landfill, but also changes the economics of waste management. So we don't have to truck it to landfills that are filling up, and we don't need big processing facilities that we increasingly don't have space for in cities. So that's one example of a real commercial impact, but also a real environmental impact. Our second investment, and probably our fifth as well, is really in this area of lowering the intensity of production. And this might be emissions intensity, or it might be chemical intensity, as we see these macro trends around sustainability and ESG criteria, and also just pressures for farmers on lowering costs and having a more resilient supply chain and more profitable business. We need solutions. And so things like autonomy or sensor systems that can really unlock new ways of farming. So Swarm Farm Robotics, our second investment, is a really good example, where with their autonomous agricultural vehicle platform, they are unlocking a bunch of precision ag tasks that otherwise weren't really possible. So if you're a turf grower, for example, and you've got a robot as well as their mowing app, you can go out and mow the turf 24/7. So not only do you save a labor unit, but you're also unlocking a premium turf product because you're mowing it all the time, so the thickness is actually improving. And that's just one example of how these technologies are not just the technology, but can actually unlock new economics. Another example on the impact side would be that same robot can also be used for precision weeding. And so they can put a spray boom on the back and go out and precision spray, saves on the input costs, but also overall lowers the chemical intensity of production. So again, an environmental benefit and a commercial benefit that's unlocked through the technology and the business model of having this platform, as well as multiple apps. And that's a great example of Australian research and Australian farmers coming together to commercialize this technology and bring it into the startup and venture capital world where we intersected with it, and then bring it back to different growers as they commercialize across Australia and beyond.
Just picking up on what you were saying about different business models, I think business models and business model innovation is so key to actually realising different ways of commercialising some of the research that people have put their heart and soul into, and that it has such great potential. Just thinking about those business models, but also other innovations in commercialisation pathways, is there anything you might add in terms of how people might think about that for themselves? They've developed something and they're thinking about, how do I go and take this to the world?
I think that's one of the exciting parts about growAG, is we're starting to open up the range of possibilities that are on people's mind to say, all right, I've invested in this research, or I've completed this research, but now what? How could I actually take the next step? And this whole world of startups or commercialization pathways or impact pathways is now available, and growAG's a tool to help people showcase the research and find partners with whom they can navigate those new pathways. So I think it's partially awareness and partially these connections and collaboration, because like we were saying before, it's actually about the team. And so finding those other people who share that interest, and maybe you're bringing together a technical or scientific skill set with an entrepreneurial one, or with the power of a distribution channel, or other kinds of collaborations that can actually make sure the research and technology has an impact as it gets to market.
That's certainly that opportunity and that power of collaboration is something we see as being really exciting about growAG. That opportunity for researchers also to look in and see who's doing something that is similar, or are there parallel paths or parallel opportunities, other groups that I could be collaborating with, and see where those pathways lie, and start forming some of those opportunities. One of the other reasons that we've put growAG together is there is a real appetite here in Australia for innovation, and certainly great opportunities to collaborate internationally to bring solutions to market. and to find new ways of solving things, whether it's through a business model or through a technology or other innovation itself. Are there any particular areas that you see as being ripe for that Australian international collaboration piece?
Yeah, one thing I think is exciting is we have so much research here, but it's quite hard to figure out where to look and who's doing what, and where would you go if we are doing diligence on a deal and we need to find an expert in some kind of advanced microbial technology, or who knows about extrusion in plant-based proteins as we look at the future. And so growAG will help us to find those experts and connect with those researchers. And it might be that we find investment opportunities, collaboration opportunities, or it might be that we just unlock the knowledge that's in our research system that has otherwise been kind of behind closed doors and hidden in research papers. So I think that's a real use case both for investors like us and our co-investors, but also for farmers who want to understand what research has been out there, or industry partners of all different sizes who want to find those experts and kind of unlock that innovation. I think that's a real powerful use case we'll see with growAG.
Yeah, no, I agree. Certainly, thinking about different companies around Australia, certainly, and they have from time to time engaged with RDCs and tapped into some of the research that's been happening. I know, for instance, Escovox partnered with the University of Tasmania and MLA to look at some shelf life stability modelling, and they've been able to increase shelf life stability for red meat, so that they're able to use different types of transport and logistics, and we less waste, greater value returned. Certainly the opportunity for startups and scale-ups and corporates as well to be able to tap into it and see what are the opportunities for me to differentiate and diversify my offer to users, to my existing clients, I think is going to be one of the really exciting things. I think also the potential for entrepreneurs looking for their next great thing is there'll be a pool of things to take a look at. And I would certainly imagine that the entrepreneurs would be looking not just at things that are identified as commercial opportunities where people are saying, hey, we really want to engage, but they'll also be looking through the research projects and seeing what can I take and what can I approach with a different lens. What do I see that perhaps someone else hasn't?
Yeah, I think going back to the impact point before, there's so much talent out there that is now post-COVID and just generally in the world thinking about climate, wanting to get into areas that will have an impact that will be good for the world. And agriculture is such a ripe area for doing that, solving climate change, feeding the future, sustainable environments. It's a super exciting area, attracting all kinds of talent. But where do you start if you come in from another background? And so we think often, there's this research on the shelf and this entrepreneur will find it and they'll just commercialize it. It's not that easy, as we know. And if it was, I think we'd live in a different world. But what's really exciting is being able to say, okay, what problems have been solved? What has the research shown? And how could I take that to the next step? And starting to narrow in on those areas and those experts, because like you said, those researchers might become collaborators or partners on the IP, but also just on the knowledge that they've unlocked in having studied the sector for maybe decades in some cases, where we say, okay, now there's this real opportunity to combine that with an entrepreneurial skill set and bring it to market. And without something like growAG, that's been really, really hard to do.
Over the last 5 years, certainly, and really over the last 2, we've seen agri-food tech innovation in Australia ramp up, and the ecosystem really, start to hum with a lot of life. Why do you think this is? I mean, there's been so much, there's so much investment over time into agriculture and agri-food in Australia, and in a way, agriculture really is part of Australian psyche. It's such a big part of how we think of Australia. But why do you think it's now? Why is it now that it's really starting to hum?
Part of it is ag tech and agri-food innovation is a global trend that was sort of kicked off in the last decade or so and started, around the world, but especially in places that had a lot of venture capital activity and funding that could come in to fuel those startups and those pathways that were really familiar in some ecosystems. What I think has happened in Australia is over the last 5 years, we've started to say, wait, why not us too? We're really good at agriculture, we're really good at agricultural research, and yet we're not seeing those commercial outcomes. Our startups are going offshore. And so there's been a whole group of people, including the Australian Agri-Tech Association, who've said, why don't we develop that strength here and be a world leader in agri-tech onshore? And so we've had a range of accelerator and incubator programs, now venture capital funds like Tenacious Ventures starting up to say, we've got really good deal flow, we've got really good foundations, And not for anything, Australian farmers are incredibly innovative, and especially in the last few years, they've faced some really tough conditions and have had to innovate. So we've got this kind of merging of trends and factors that has really said the time is now, Australia is the place, and we finally have the building blocks in the ecosystem where we can take some of these things forward and start to punch above our weight on a global scale.
To that point, I think the Australian agricultural sector is so hungry and has such an appetite for innovation, because that's really where we've seen the productivity growth. That's where we've seen our ability to compete on a global stage. Certainly, Australia exports 2/3 of what we produce, and so we have to be competitive in those global markets. And in order to do that, we're looking at innovation. We're looking at really novel solutions across the whole of the pipeline of from agriculture all the way through to the plate and supply chain in between. There's so much appetite, and I think also that diversity of geography and climatic zones across Australia. We grow just about everything, so there's so much innovation on so many different areas. It's ramping up.
That's right. I think that's really what I meant by the building blocks, that we've got this counter-seasonal testing environment, we've got different climatic zones, we've got really innovative farmers who are willing to test and trial technologies, and we've got this research capability. And finally now we're able to bring it together and start to see some of that activity and see some of these successes, not only in building innovations that help Australian farmers be more productive and efficient and reach the $100 billion target, which is absolutely key, but also commercialize in their own right and start to build this own separate and independent but highly related agri-tech economy of startups that are bringing our innovation and research to the world and showing that stuff originated in Australia can help other countries be clean, green, and efficient and productive and profitable, which is also really exciting.
One of the many hats that you wear has been in that accelerator space and has been working with groups, whether they're farmers with a great idea or whether they're startups looking to take that through to an actual product and service that has great market traction. You've also worked with RDCs. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in Australia? And certainly, I always hear a lot about how innovators in Australia have good product market fit and have good, sort of the mud on the boots factor. Certainly thinking about different people coming to Australia and seeing what's here.
Yeah. One of the really unique and exciting things about Australia is how the industry is set up. So we have these different research and development corporations who collectively, through farm gate levies and contribution from the federal government, fund hundreds of millions of dollars of agricultural research every year. And that gives us this really great foundation from which to start with. But we also need involvement of those farmers through that RDC system and through programs like Farmers to Founders and regional innovation hubs that we're seeing more and more of, to kind of bring together the boots on the ground perspective with the technical and scientific perspective and make sure we're doing really good science, really great technology, but also that it matters for a farmer. And I think that's uniquely Australian in some ways, that we have these innovations that have been ground tested and that farmers who aren't highly subsidized and are facing really tough climatic conditions and need to export to markets want to use and are adopting. And that gives a really unique stamp of approval that is a real competitive advantage in Australia.
Absolutely. Governments and also user groups around Australia are also looking at how do we increase adoption? How do we get more out of these solutions? How can we verify and validate what things can do and how they operate in conditions in this neck of the woods? Certainly that's also something that's really driving adoption, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And we're seeing more involvement at the state level, at the federal level, but also at the local level, which is absolutely so important, whether it's farming systems groups or local economic development organizations or grassroots kind of hubs and co-working spaces and incubators that are popping up to accelerate this innovation and connect maybe traditionally city-based tech startup people with boots on the ground, really know the value chain ag innovators. And it's through those kind of translation functions and localized support systems that we can really build technologies and innovations that will have an impact rather than just kind of sit in a lab somewhere and don't actually move the needle for the industry.
Thinking back about that explosion and the rapid growth that we've seen here in Australia and that real connectivity of the Australian ecosystem with international hubs around the world, we've certainly seen, I think, a real growth of the investment ecosystem as well to match that. Obviously, first-hand viewing of that, thinking back to 5 years ago, the people who were investing into Australian agri-tech startups were fintech investors, or they were SaaS investors, and the companies happened to be focused on ag applications. Now I think we're really seeing both funds and standalone VCs who have agri-food tech as their core focus. And certainly a lot of those other groups are focusing more and more and really, striking a clear thematic around that space. What's your experience been?
Yeah, I would say 5 years ago, especially, and even 3 years ago, we were just starting to see the early stage ecosystem maturing. So accelerator and incubator programs that always were interested in ag and food, but maybe didn't understand the business models or were a bit nervous about hardware. And then we had a number of dedicated agri-food tech accelerator programs pop up, like SproutX and Spark Labs Cultivate and GrowLab and Harvest. So many amazing programs dedicated to this sector, and that's really improved the deal flow. But then you get this challenge where investors go, oh, which startup should I invest in? And I don't really know the sector. And again, maybe I'm nervous about hardware or biologicals. And as we've matured, we've seen more dedicated interest in the space that's created co-investment opportunities. So we're a specialist firm in the space, the only one still, but we're seeing more and more interest to co-invest with us and to co-invest with other sector experts who might be angels or might be funds who've done deep dives into agri-food tech. And that co-investment landscape and building those kind of partnerships is starting to unlock even more innovation. And those partnerships are onshore with other funds or corporates, but also offshore with venture capital firms overseas or multinational investors who might be able to then help those Australian innovations kind of go global and succeed as they raise more money. So having that early stage ecosystem and then increasingly the sector expertise here is one of the unlock codes, as well as the co-investors who have platforms like growAG to then know how to navigate into Australia and find those collaborators and co-investors.
Certainly there's a really exciting pool here now, I think, of potential co-investors that groups from anywhere around the world, whether they're domestic groups who are wanting to explore and sort of partner with someone who understands the sector and understands where the growth trajectories are, both locally and internationally, but also with some of those international groups who have been coming in and travelling and visiting and so on. Certainly pre-COVID, we saw a lot of visits and a lot of repeat visits and people setting up scouts and hubs here in Australia, or accelerators themselves. And I think as we go through this time, that opportunity to know that there's someone locally who can have that hands-on approach is really important.
Yeah, I mean, Australia's far away from most countries, and so having a local trusted partner, whether it's a scout or a fund like ours to co-invest with, can be really important in unlocking those partnerships, which we're starting to see more and more of.
Thanks for joining us today, Sarah. It's been a really fascinating chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity.
And thank you for watching. growAG's purpose is to showcase and make research, expertise, projects and emerging opportunities easy to navigate, identify and connect with. We invite you to take a look at growAG.com.